Welcome inside Ohio Stadium, where Ohio State just wrapped up its spring practice season with its spring game at the Shoe. And certainly, Andy, we knew the big storyline going into today was going to be the quarterback battle, specifically Julian Sayin. Practices we had been to previously this spring did not look great for Julian Sayin, the guy who really, since the moment he transferred to Ohio State from Alabama last year, has been viewed as the front runner to be Ohio State's 2025 starting quarterback. It's felt like there's maybe been a little bit of doubt around that this spring, but watching Julian Sayin out there today, Andy, it did feel like we were watching Ohio State starting quarterback.
I agree, Dan. It felt like he pulled ahead in some ways today, and even in the way that Ryan Day sort of talked afterward. He talked about seeing growth from all the quarterbacks, but especially from Julian, and talking about the resilience that Julian had to bounce back from a few tough practices we watched that Day agreed were tough, and now he's bouncing back and having just a really good day. He seemed confident, especially early on in the offense, figuring out where to go with the football. Maybe some of the vanilla defenses we were seeing from the Matt Patricia defense today helped with that. But in any case, just standing in the pocket, delivering some good throws early in this game and developing some chemistry with some guys. It makes you wonder if he was sandbagging when we were out there watching the practices even. Kidding aside, it was a very impressive day from Julian. And I think for me, the most impressive throw was probably the one he made to Milin Graham, the intermediate route, where he just zips it into a really tight window through some good coverage from Aaron Scott. But there were other highlights. The touchdown throw he had to Max Clare was layered beautifully between three defenders. He had a couple more deep downfield throws like that. And you saw why today he was that five-star talent, why he was considered the front runner entering this competition. And we saw it from Will last year. It took time for things to click. He didn't look really good in the spring. Maybe that's where Julian's at, is he needed time to develop that chemistry, really learn the offense and develop that command being the starting guy. There are still elements of his game that need improving. I think we saw him hold the ball too long on a few plays, especially in the second half. But you saw the flashes today, you saw the glimpses, and you saw the confidence of why Julian Sayin, it feels like he has pulled ahead in this competition.
You mentioned that comparison to Will, and I remember last year's spring game, coming out of a spring game and feeling like, okay, that was like a little more like it, what we were looking to see from Will. He didn't look great. He didn't look like the guy we would ultimately see lead Ohio State to a national championship in the college ball playoff. But I remember, it seems like Devin had been better for most of the spring. Will was like a little bit better than Devin in the spring game, and then he really kind of took off in preseason camp. Now the question is, can Julian do the same thing? Because I think really from Ryan Day's press conference after the game, you kind of got the overall sense, the overall theme coming out of this spring was it was a good spring. They had a lot of good practices. Ryan Day's really talked up the competitiveness, the edginess of his team a lot recently, but he's also talked a lot about this team's inexperience and the need to grow. And I think there's going to be a lot of places where this team needs to grow in those 25 preseason camp practices, and I think quarterback's at the very top of that list. But I think today was an encouraging day, really, for the entire quarterback room. I mean, Lincoln Keenel's had a good day too. I mean, he I think Julian, to me, if I'm picking who was the best quarterback today, I would say it was Julian, which is a change from what we had said after previous practices we had the opportunity to watch, particularly the Student Appreciation Day last week, for practice in Ohio Stadium yesterday. I think today was the first day where I really came out of it feeling like, okay, Julian looks like the best quarterback on this team. But I think Lincoln had a good day too. Tavian looked like a freshman certainly in the first half through 2 interceptions, but I think he finished the game strong. I think you saw those flashes of that five-star talent from Tavian, where Tavian's probably not really a factor in this quarterback competition this year. It's pretty clear he's the number 3 guy behind Julian and Lincoln right now. But I think you see those flashes from him that you can see he can be a really good player for Ohio State in the future. Speaking of guys who flashed, you mentioned Milin Graham. We wrote about it yesterday after the practice in the Shoe that Milin Graham was one of the biggest stars of the day. That was very much the case again today.
Yep, 100%. And I talked about it. I tweeted about it. For him to be the number 4 receiver on this team is absolutely ridiculous. And we talk about it year after year after year with Brian Hartline having the best receivers room in the country constantly. I mean, there are a long line of Big Ten teams that would love to have Milin Graham as their number 1 receiver, and he's the number 4 receiver here. But just the smoothness, the speed, the acceleration that we've heard talked about with Milin Graham that's flashed since his high school tape, right? was behind the 8 ball coming in last year as a summer enrollee, and he's talked through the spring about how much that kind of hindered him. Brian Hartline mentioned that too, about how far behind he was, and especially I think coming out of playing some smaller time high school football there in New Haven, Indiana. Man, this spring he has really started to take off and find that form. That house call 49-yard touchdown just on a glance route there. Really impressive, but also the strong hands to make that contested catch against Aaron Scott. Ran some other really nice routes today. Got a pretty heavy target share and showed why, because it was a really standout performance for Milin Graham in this one. Not to glow about everything, though, because there are some areas still on this roster that I think need addressed, and it starts at defensive tackle with me. We heard Day say afterwards, when he was asked about the defensive line depth, that they're going to have to take a hard look at their portal options, and it was clear why. After that first wave, Caden McDonald and Hendrick Houston came off the field. It just felt like there was consistent knockback, and that's the term Day used too, of Ohio State's offensive line, guys getting blown off the ball from that defensive tackle group, that next wave of defensive tackles. And it was really apparent on the first drive when the twos came on. There, C.J. Donaldson at running back just had wide open lanes consistently to find yardage. And it's clear that there are holes in the depth of this defensive tackle, this defensive interior group, and Ohio State is going to have to maybe look at some portal options there to help give them a boost, because I don't even really know who the backup nose is right now.
Yeah, I think defensive tackle is without question, when the portal reopens next week, the number one need for Ohio State in the transfer portal. Sounded like, based on what Ryan Day was saying, that they're probably going to be a little more active in the post-spring portal this year, and a reason for that was because the winter portal season effectively all took place while they were in the college football playoffs. So, Ohio State made some really good moves in the winter portal. Got Ethan Onionwa, got Phillip Daniels, got Max Clare, got C.J. Donaldson, you mentioned, got Logan George, another guy who I think probably the standout of the defensive line group today, had a really good day at defensive end. They got some really good players in that winter portal window, but it's hard to really focus on building your roster in the transfer portal when you're focused on trying to go win a national championship. And so it sounds like we should probably expect a little bit more movement in the post-spring window this year than maybe we've seen the last couple years. And I think without question, defensive tackle. I think they need at least one defensive tackle. Maybe they even need two defensive tackles, because like you said, I just don't know who the backup DTs are on this team right now. We've heard it consistently. Guys like Tywone Malone and Jason Moore and Will Smith Jr., they flashed, but they just haven't shown that they can be guys Ohio State can consistently rely on. And so I think, especially in nose tackle, but I think, just defensive tackle in general, that's got to be A1 on the priority list for the transfer portal when that reopens again next week. Now, as we always talk about in the spring game, when one thing's good, the other thing's bad. When one thing's bad, the other thing's good. So I think the positive of that is, you said the offensive line was knocking a lot of people back. I think this offensive line, I felt all spring this offensive line's in a pretty good place, and I come out of today feeling the same way. And I think things are still a little bit unsettled at tackle. You've talked about it. You think Austin Searveld might be that guy at right tackle, and it is feeling like with each practice we see, the more and more we see him taking those first team reps at right tackle, that I think we went into spring feeling like, oh, maybe they're just kind of easing those other guys in. Now it feels like they really are looking at Austin Searveld potentially being the guy at right tackle.
I agree, and it's the weight he lost in the offseason. It's clear he changed his body, being named an Iron Buckeye in preparation to possibly play that right tackle role, I think. And now you actually start to feel a lot better about the offensive tackle depth with the strides he's taken at that position. Really, it's tough to judge offensive line play off rip in a lot of ways, because especially offensive tackles, you will want to look at some reps, maybe go back and look at some film. But yeah, that interior especially was getting a lot of knockback on the inside, creating rushing lanes for Ohio State's running backs. Doing some of that. Some other guys who stood out for me on the defensive side of the ball, Lorenzo Styles Jr. I thought was in a lot of close coverage phases, had a PBU or two in this game. For me, I think that's a guy that, coming into spring, there was a lot of conversation from me, from other people, that Ohio State might look at, hey, is Lorenzo Styles Jr. really the best option at nickel, or do you want to slide Jermaine Matthews Jr. in slot side and maybe make room for an Aaron Scott or a Devin Sanchez on the outside? Lorenzo's shown throughout this spring, he's been standing out in some other practices we've seen, that he is up to the task at that nickel spot and really making his case to lock down that starting job here in his senior year. just really close in coverage. Payton Pierce keeps standing out to me. There was a play where he gave Jake Cook a forearm shiver, knocked him to the ground, and went and got a tackle for loss. I mean, that's when you hear James Laurinaitis talk about him and the wrestling background, the way he can deliver strikes in close space, the way he can shed blocks. It seemed like he was in on every other tackle when he was on the field. And so another great day from Payton Pierce. And it really feels like Sonny Styles, man, today had a couple great triggers to get into the backfield. This Ohio State linebacking trio, the top three, are really turning some heads this spring.
Yep, totally agree with both of those guys you named. I think, a couple other guys on the offensive side of the ball. Bo Jackson's a guy we talked about a lot this spring. He continues to look really good today. Got a lot of reps. It was a pretty short day of work for James Peoples and C.J. Donaldson, but it feels like Bo's a guy. He keeps it up. He could really push for some carries in that backfield. I think Peoples and Donaldson are the top two guys, but I think Bo's pushing to be a third guy in that rotation of what we've seen from him. I think just for tight ends in general, it was a good day for them. Max Clare having the touchdown. Jelani Thurman made some plays. Nate Roberts made some plays. We've talked about it a lot, that this tight end room really could be the best tight end room in the country this year, and I think today was more evidence of that. Even with Will Kasmarek being out, we saw him before the game in a boot on a scooter. Ryan Day said that's not a long-term injury, so certainly they're expecting to have him back for preseason camp, but even without him today, they looked really good at tight end. And one more guy I want to give a shout-out to, Jayden Fielding, man. We've seen him the last 2 days. He's just been nails. He was perfect on his kicks yesterday during the practice in the shoe. He was perfect on his kicks today. Granted, not quite the same thing as kicking in an actual game, but that's a guy, he took a lot of flack last year. He revealed earlier this week that he had been kicking through a torn muscle in his hip for pretty much the entire season. Everybody remembers that Marshall game where the kicks went out of bounds, and then he told Ryan Day he had something going on with his hip. He actually tore an adductor muscle in his hip, kicked through that the rest of the season. I think that had an effect on some of the struggles he had last year. Just seeing him out there the last couple of days, I think Jayden Fielding might be one of the best kickers in the country. I think he really has a chance to be that. We'll see if that ultimately weighs out when the actual games begin, but that's another guy. The kickers don't usually get a lot of love, but I want to give him some love because I think he's done everything he needed to do this spring to prove he is the right guy to be Ohio State's kicker and to lock down that job.
I agree. Especially in anything inside 50, you can talk about having a 50-plus kicker in college is kind of a luxury. And maybe now that his hip is healthy, we'll get to see some more of that range from Fielding. But inside of 50 in the playoffs in particular, it was a lot of consistency that Jayden Fielding showed at the end of the year. Made some big kicks at Penn State, too. And now, as he is getting healthy, and we're seeing that inside of 50, I think just to make that consistently and be that guy who can really be relied upon as a kicker. That's what Jayden Fielding's game is, and he's showing the strengths of that here lately in spring practice. And again, maybe he'll add some range as the year goes. Overall, though, a lot of things to like about the spring game today for Ohio State. There's a lot more development to happen too, I think, is the key, especially in those defensive trenches. And I'm just it's kind of this weird gap now between spring game and preseason camp that we're going to be talking about this and diving into this, and certainly a lot more to talk about here as this April unfolds, and we'll see what Ohio State gets after in the transfer portal.
Yep, lots more coverage to come over on 11warriors.com. We thank you all for following along with our coverage all spring, and lots more to come. As he said, we'll be wrapping up spring practice. We'll be following the transfer portal. NFL draft is just 10 days away or something like that. Ohio State team's going to be going to the White House next week. I'll be there in D.C. on Monday for that. So spring football is over at Ohio State. Lots more good stuff to come, though, over on 11warriors.com. For Andy Anders, I'm Dan Hope. Hope you join us over there, and thanks for joining us for another episode of After Carmen.